Hello and welcome to Humans of Diplomacy. Today I am in Brussels in this beautiful studio in NATO headquarters with a very special guest, Irene Fellin. Irene is the NATO Secretary General's Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security and Human Security. She worked previously across several institutions such as civil society, the United Nations, university, think tanks, and also her own government, Italy. Irene has worked across gender and peace and security her entire career and life. Irene, thank you so much for welcoming us into this very beautiful studio today.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of your podcast and this new project, and congratulations.
Thank you so much. So, Irene, just to get us started, can you share a little bit about why you wanted to work on gender and security? And was it something early in your life or in your career that shaped that decision?
So I have to say that I didn't know that I wanted to work on that. Life took different paths, over the time. And to explain how I got there, I have to explain a little bit part of my early career and professional and also personal life. Because if I am who I am today, this is the result of many personal choices. I studied cultural heritage. So my first career, how I always say, it was in a completely different field. When I went to the university, I had this dream to become director of a museum and study and work in cultural. Coming from Italy, we are surrounded by monuments and culture. So this was very much part of my also education together with my family. Every summer we were visiting a different region, different museum. So after the university, I moved to Paris. I went to l'École du Louvre and to do something very prestigious with this idea on my mind. I would have come back to my country or go somewhere else and become one day director of a small collection engaging in project exhibitions. But then apparently life had decided to decide differently for me. So when I moved to Rome and I became a stagiaire, an intern at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, at the Department for Cultural Cooperation at that time, I entered into the world that I didn't know. I come from a small town in the north of Italy where diplomacy and the international world is not really our daily life. And I learned and I discovered this world throughout the lens of the cultural heritage and cultural projects. So it was close to what I was doing, but at the same time, I was stepping out of my, in a way, comfort zone and discover a different system and another career. But what happened there was not then a career choice. It was that I fall in love and I met my future husband, who is a diplomat by career. He was then very soon posted abroad. I was young, naive. I didn't know what to expect. I simply, after a few months, decided to follow him.
Whereabouts?
In Ankara, in Turkey. That happened 20 years ago. And exactly. So we went there, and I thought by speaking different languages, being young and motivated, I would have found a different job. I took this as a very simple thing because by having the passion, I didn't see any barriers. But I had no idea of what a career diplomat and the life around diplomacy looked like, especially 2 decades ago, which is different from where I think we are now collectively when we talk about this job. So to make this long story short, I entered into a crisis because I had expectation to continue my professional career, to find jobs, maybe more with a more flexible way, but I didn't expect to encounter that many barriers, both practical but also cultural. There was an expectation in the expat community that my role was going to be the role of a spouse and to become a formal spouse very soon because we were not married. So there was also this expectation, that a couple had to be married regularly. So we living together also was not something that was very common at that time in that particular context. After a couple of years trying to find different jobs and different opportunities, I decided to go back to the university. I felt challenged personally as a woman. This was really a personal, intimate process I was going through.
For these 2 years, you didn't find a job? for
No,
the
that
first 2
was
years?
not possible. But there are also some elements that sometimes are not clear. That legally there are some barriers. You cannot simply go into a country.
No.
If you are married to a diplomat, you are not allowed to work.
Depends on the country.
Yes, there are very little bilateral agreements that allow this. If you are not married, you can, of course, have the regular documents, but then you are also not allowed to work because you have a special visa that allow you to live in the country. So it's not so as simple as that, as people can think, when they ask, oh, you just go and you find a job. And also finding a job, it was not easy. The language barrier and the possibilities were very limited. So I decided to make a good use of my time by going back to the university.
In Ankara?
Yes, in Ankara, Middle East Technical University, a very good university in English. And that's the moment where something happened, because I found this master on women's and gender studies. And I decided to enroll in this master because what was happening to me as a young woman was really challenging my understanding of the role of women within the society. So it started as a personal journey, but it then became something bigger, something I hadn't planned and I hadn't seen coming at the very beginning. I was very lucky because I met incredible women there. My first professor and mentor and friend was Irene Fellin, who at that time was the special representative of the UN Secretary General for Violence Against Women. Mm-hmm. So I think that this encounter also was one turning point in my life, who changed also the way in which I decided to engage in my master, and then making this a new profession.
And so after your master's, what happened? Can you tell us a little bit more?
I started doing projects. It was not automatic. So I started engaging with the UN in Ankara, UNDP, UNICEF at the beginning. I did my research on what we used to call honor killing at that time, compared with the femicide between what was happening in Turkey and especially looking at the European country. Very interesting. I started looking at my country from distance and I realized many things. I understood many patterns and dynamic I hadn't perceived while I was living in my country. When I was coming back to Italy during that period and I was sharing what I was doing, the reaction of people were always, oh, yes, because you live there, because you live outside. Of course, they have problems.
Yes.
So this dynamic that the other countries and the other poor women have problems, but we are already on a different stage. But this was the time when we started having femicide in Italy, and in the typical dynamic also, compare with a family and often brother and sister killing the relative. And so by my study and compare studies and analysis, I realized that we all share the same concern that the patriarchal cultures can take different forms. Of course, there can be cultural elements, but the common ground is about the patriarchy and is about the control of women. And this problem has become bigger and bigger in Italy when we look into femicide in different patterns. And today, it's expressed very often, as we know, with boyfriend in very young age killing their partner or ex-partner, including children when it comes to divorce and separation. So what it had become a phenomenon at that time appeared to be distant from our culture, it has in the end, very unfortunately, become the news every day.
So you shared how you were accidentally, in a way, joined the world of diplomacy and in the beginning worked briefly for the United Nations. Since you were not very intentional about it, was it something that really surprised you when you started working with the United Nations?
It did.
About how it worked and how it functioned?
It did. It was a learning process.
Yeah.
As I said at the beginning, Ankara is not a very international community, so finding jobs there, it was not that easy. So entering to the UN was a natural choice. I was there as a consultant, And I follow projects. I said it started from domestic violence, in particular the honor killing or honor-related crimes, and then it moved into early marriages. So while I was working at UNICEF and looking at this form of violence against girls and all the implication with education, dropping off from schools, and understanding the different patterns and dynamic. It was not that such a surprise, because I think that when you work in a regional office, in a country office, it's different than working for an HQ. So big organizations such as NATO here or the EU or the UN headquarters have completely different dynamics compared to an office in a country office in a city. So I was not that surprised. And I had, it was, I think, after already 3 years that I've been in Ankara, and my experience with diplomacy as a partner for diplomat had also shaped my way of engaging with diplomacy, even in a passive way, throughout my partner, but also our social life. In a place such as Ankara and many other capitals, the expat life is very limited. So you basically live very much confined in your bubble. Mm-hmm. This is why my experience at the university was amazing, because for me it was a way to be with normal people, with Turkish people, and being engaged with them. And sometimes I share this little secret that to feel part of them, I didn't tell them who I was. So at the beginning, I was telling that I was an Erasmus student. I didn't want to be associated with the diplomatic life because of the biases, because of the image that is around us. So at the beginning, I simply said, no, I came here on an exchange program, and then I decided to stay. So they treated me in a normal way. And then only after the first year, when we got more acquainted, and then we became more friends with some of them, one day I told them the reason, why I was there. And so one of my classmates one day said, Soko, can you give me a ride? And then I said, of course, come with me. And then he was looking around, I said, where is your driver? And I said, there is no driver. I am the driver. But just to say that there are so many stereotypes around this life. So I was very happy to have lied at the beginning, so to have hidden the truth, because this allowed me to show up for the person I was and not for the status and this idea that surrounds us still, sometimes the diplomatic community.
So were you expecting that many biases against diplomats and diplomatic life?
No, I was not.
Okay.
I come from, as I told you, from this small town in the north of Italy, where we are a bit different, because it's this town is Bolzano, the region is South Tyrol. Mm-hmm. We live at the border with Austria, and we are characterized by the fact that more than 70% of the population locally speaks German. So we have multiple ethnicity, and we live in this bilingual life since we are born. Everything is different if you compare this with the rest of Italy. Our culture is much closer to the Middle European culture, to the German culture, and we were part with Austria of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the roots are still there. So for me, it was again another bubble. So I moved from one bubble to the other, and I was not expecting all this idea around this role. So it was really a bit of a shock, I have to say, and I had to adapt. Sometimes I had the feeling to be in a movie, something that it was far from me, not really the life. So I was watching from outside and finding some of these expectations about roles, about gender roles, what it was supposed to be, the expectation about what a spouse is supposed to be. Cooking tea, baking, or organizing teas and engaging, and not having any professional aspirations.
I was going to ask you about the next kind of pivots in your career, but before that, do you feel like you ever get out of that bubble?
I did. Okay. I challenged the system. If today I'm here, it's because I didn't feel I belong to that system, with all the due respect for other women who decide to pursue the career as a couple, because this is how historically was conceived. This applies to diplomats, but also to military. the family is conceived about having one person leading the career,
And
because one following and taking care of children. Also because it's very complicated, as I explained throughout my experience, to find a job when you move and to change after 3 or 4 years. It's not a given. And also if you have children, following the children, education and adaptation is very challenging. But it was not me. So what I had to accept when I went through this initial crisis, in a way, that it was right to feel different and to try to find something else for myself. We are not all the same, and it's not because historically this pattern and this career was conceived as for a couple and for a family that we could not change this. So I challenge myself, and in a way I challenge the system as well, by saying that I wanted to have my own career. What happened next is that I always had still conceived the fact that I had to build a portable career. So it was my husband who was going to be posted somewhere, and I had to bring my career, so in terms of consultancies or project, to be with him, and then eventually later with our daughters. But then at a certain point, NATO entered into my life, and so we had to change the way of also working in our own personal decision and family.
So, before you explain to us how that works in practice, do you think the discriminations or the stereotypes, rather, that you faced are the reason why you chose international security? Because women are not very much expected in that field?
No, it came by coincidence.
Again?
Yes, again. It was not
Okay.
a decision. I have to say, we came to Brussels after Ankara, and it was 2010. And it was the moment when 1325 was celebrated. It was 10th anniversary. I had started this, but not work on that. So we were here, and after a couple of years, so I was doing different projects, starting again, having little consultancies and different projects. But then this was the moment where NATO established the position of the special representative. So the position I have today was established in August 2012, and Ambassador Mariskara was the first special representative, and she started her mandate in September. And she was completely alone. And at a certain point, she went to the different delegations to ask if there were experts available to be seconded. And it happened that a colleague of of the ministry with whom I had worked at the beginning of my career in Rome said, "Oh, I know a person who lives in Brussels and who could be the right expert." So I had my interview, and this is why I entered into this field. So that was not something I had done before. I had the right mindset, I had studied it, but working on women, peace and security started at the beginning of 2013 in this very office, but with a different role.
And after that, do you feel like there were other turning points in your career?
Yes, when I finished this 2 years mandate as an advisor, so Ambassador Mariskara left, and then a new special representative came. At the end of the 2 years, I was pregnant with my twins, so I moved back. I finished my term here, and I moved back to Rome. And after 10 years abroad, I moved from NATO directly to the hospital where I spent the last months of my pregnancy.
Oh, no, sorry.
And I went, it was okay, but I needed to rest. And I went back home with my twins in a house I didn't know, in a city where I had been absent from 10 years.
That's rough.
It was tough, but then I had time to think what to do with my life. So I really enjoyed the time at NATO, and especially working on the international security. And I had understood in this period that this is where I felt comfortable. That was my area. And this is why that was a turning point, because I continued since then, since 2013, focusing on this specific work. What I learned by coming back to Italy, that there was no any reality really focusing on this, no think tank having a really integrated women, peace and security or gender and security, no other NGOs. So you had more development cooperation, you had specific project at that time, still a lot with Afghan women, but not really looking to 1325. Italy just had released its first national action plan, but there was no structural work around this.
I just wanted to say for our viewers that 1325 is the Security Council resolution that, for the first time introduced the importance of having women participating in peace and security efforts.
Thank you, Santa.
So,
I give for granted because this is my everyday bread.
Yes.
And so it was 2014 when and 15. So again, another turning point. It was the 15th anniversary because the resolution was adopted in the year 2000, and we know that big anniversaries also create an opportunity for assessing the progresses, but also go through the challenges and try to have a vision on how to overcome those barriers. So for me, it was very clear. I was in my country back, and I had an opportunity to fill this gap. There was nothing really structural working around this. And I also realized that it was not easy to get professional opportunities being alone, not having a network around. So while my expertise was recognized, I didn't belong to that context. So I decided that I had to be proactive and create this context by myself. And this was the moment when I decided to launch and found the Italian chapter of Women in International Security, called also WISE. So WISE Italy is part of a broader network that was founded in 1987 in the US, in Washington, D.C., WISE Global, by a group of women working in diplomacy, working in the security sector, way before the adoption of Resolution 1325. But those women felt the need to create a safe network and a space where they could exchange, support each other, and find a way to break this ice ceiling. At that time was a lot about professional careers, so about them and about those barriers. And with the time, and also with the adoption of Resolution 1325, this part has remained, of course, about the support, the development of the career, but it has also integrated the work of the resolution, how to do gender analysis, how to really look into security and international affairs from a different perspective. So now the work of WISE is in a way binary, is about mentoring, is about supporting each other and creating the network. On the other side is by advocating how to integrating the perspective and promote a full and meaningful implementation of the women, peace and security agenda. At the beginning, I created a small network around me. I involved a couple of key persons. One person was really fundamental, is a parliamentarian, Lia Quartapelle. We didn't know each other. I met her. She was in her 30s, a young parliamentarian, and I proposed her my project. And she liked it and she trusted me, so she helped me creating the right environment. So we launched WISE at the Senate in Italy, and immediately the interest and the attention grew exponentially to the point that something that was planned to be like a informal project, I was just testing the waters, try to understand what to do with this idea, had to be formalized immediately in an NGO because of the interest and the willingness also to work with us.
And so the WISE is also based on networks, right? And being surrounded by other women to advocate for more women's participation. What role has sisterhood played in your career? Do you feel like this is something important for you, being now such a recognized leader in this field and having the responsibilities that you have today?
It is fundamental. It was very important before because then from WISE as a network, I worked for 5 years on another network project, which is the foundation of the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network, so working into mediation across the Mediterranean, but also connecting this reality with other networks that had been established over the years in the Nordic countries, in the African region, the Arab country, in the Southeast of Asia, across the Commonwealth. And very recently in January, I attended again one of the meetings with the Global Alliance of those networks, and it was amazing to find my sisters back. So after these years at NATO, I didn't always have the opportunity to join them in this gathering, so we were connected, but the way in which we came together in this critical historical period, and we try also to see how we can support ourselves, but also, the values that we promote and advocate for, it was amazing. And I think that networking is one of the key elements in a professional life of women. one of the things that we see when we compare our challenges also with the sometimes easier dynamic when we look at men's professional career is that everything comes throughout network. So we need to support each other and create these networks. I'm very open then in working with men. And I think that at a certain point, those worlds have to come together. And then those networks has to be cross-cutting. So it's not only among women and among men. This is where we will be really successful in the moment, where we will see ourselves as equal in terms of this network. But at the same time, I always cherish the space that we can create among women and the conversation that we can have professionally, but also take into consideration the personal dimension that has a big impact on our professional lives as well, is something that we can do in a more transparent way when it comes to the conversation that we have when men are in the room.
Yes. Great. So now we're going to move, if you're okay with it, to your current role at NATO. Can you tell us a little bit more about what a day in your shoes looks like, being, the SG's special representative, but also a mother of 2 daughters and a spouse, and what does it look like?
So I have to say that before starting my day at NATO, we have to look what happens, behind the scenes and before, more or less between 6:30. And so it's really has become a very structured way of managing. Who cooks, who prepares the daughters, and now it's just to check if everything is fine.
How old are they now?
They will turn 12 this year.
Oh, wow.
And they grow fast. And this generation is impressive, in a span of 2 weeks, you just turn your head and they are already independent, going outside alone. So now it's more guiding them, and protecting them, but one step, behind. It's this delicate moment. But there is a lot to do in terms of logistic and making sure that the day then will run smoothly, especially because when you enter in this building today, you did it here.
For the first time, thank
Another
you.
bubble.
Yes.
It's an experience, I think, also the magnificence of the headquarters itself. My life gets disconnected from the life outside. Very often we cannot have our phones because of the confidentiality of our conversation when we negotiate documents in the committees. Again, we are isolated. And that has been complicated at the beginning, knowing that I couldn't be reached. And then that was for many hours. That was
if
going
the school
to be,
calls,
yes. So
who's
you
going
need
to
to
pick
have
up?
this safety network, another colleague, another relative. And that was complicated at the beginning. And it's also dangerous because you are completely absorbed by the life you do here. So you feel sometimes also disconnected from the life that happens outside. So it's very important, I think, to keep the balance between the two. So I do this more personal part, the mother part, and then I enter. So I transition while I drive to the HQ in my other role, which is then a mix of meeting with ambassadors or sometimes also ministers coming from different capital from allied countries, but also from partner countries, discussing about what we are doing, listening to them, what they do in their own countries, and to see what we can do bilaterally or also multilateral level. It's a mix between a pure diplomatic life and advocacy, but then it's also project work together with my team. We try to understand dynamics and also to put in place projects that can be impactful.
People don't really understand what NATO does on a day-to-day basis. What is it that you think people usually get wrong about NATO?
It's the dynamic, internal dynamic, the difficulty to understand that allies nowadays 32. We were 30 when I entered. We are 32 today. That was one of the big elements and changes during my mandate when both Sweden and Finland decided to join the alliance. It was also a great professional and historical moment, to experience from within. It's the complexity of the unity of different allies. This applies to NATO, but to the EU as well. Is the beauty of the differences. It's also why we are stronger when we are together. But being together doesn't mean being equal. Having the same political position, having the same ideas always. what is that we want is being together while respecting our differences and find the common ground. So that's what it is. It's not because sometimes we hear about a different opinion that an international organization such as NATO or the EU will collapse and disappear. What we do every day is to work around our differences to find our common ground and to build consensus. And this is the challenging part, but at the same time is also the beauty of the multilateralism.
Of course, and if there were no disagreements, we wouldn't need a platform where people would come together and
Indeed.
try to address them. So you now have two hats, human security and women, peace and security, as I was mentioning earlier. So what does it mean, human security for NATO? From the outside, we would think that NATO only addresses hardcore security, but what does it mean for you as the special representative on this issue as well?
You know, when you listen to our Secretary Generals, and I speak plural because I refer to the two, I had Jens Stoltenberg and currently Mark Rutte, when we talk about protecting the alliance, we protect, I will say, every inch of the alliance, but every individual. It is about protecting our population. It all starts about human lives. And of course, it's about the territory, it's about the infrastructure, it's about everything that represents life. So it's then not only lives, but it's also what comes together. So when we talk about a whole of society approach, when we talk about resilience, what is needed by us, by individuals to live. And this is then where the gender dimension comes in, what the different needs are. You know, if we talk to women or men, or if you also have an intersection approach by age and other elements. For us, the concept, how human security is defined, stems from the UN concept of human security, but it's tailor-made around the alliance that we are, political military alliance, or a defense alliance. It comes around the concept of protection of civilians, but in an operational way. So when we are deployed, how do we have to take into consideration not to harm civilians and how to protect them, you know, to avoid this. So, of course, all the concepts around human security were defined during our experience in Afghanistan mainly. So we spent 2 decades there, which is a kind of operation that we no longer have in these terms outside the area of responsibility. So the responsibility of NATO is the territory of allies, is geographically bounded by the border of our allies. That changes when new allies join, such as we said, Sweden and Finland. So now the territory is bigger. When we went to Afghanistan, we were outside our area of responsibility. Still today, we have our presence in Kosovo, and we had our presence in Iraq until a few days ago. Now our staff, for security reasons, has been relocated in Naples, where we have a strategic command, and we are continuing our missions there. But this was a different mission. This was a training and education mission, so supporting the Iraqi government in training their own government and the armed forces to make sure that they could provide the security service to their own countries. So our experience in Afghanistan defined our concept of human security that with the time expanded. So under this umbrella at NATO, we have protection of civilians. We have conflict-related sexual violence, children and armed conflict, combating trafficking against human beings, and cultural property protection, which is very funny, brings me back to the beginning, of my career. So they together are under the umbrella of human security. Now, the challenge for the Alliance and for us leading this work is to move and the thinking from an operation outside the area of responsibility into what we call a possible Article 5 operation. So what would happen in case of an attack to one of the ally, where we will activate what we call the collective defense, the Article 5. So if one ally is attacked, the others will defend. But so engaging on your own territory is different than engaging outside.
Of course. So now moving to women, peace and security, what does it mean in the context of NATO? Concretely, what are the things that you are responsible for pushing?
Defining this agenda at NATO is different than the agenda that we know from the UN. So we share the same principles, stemming from Resolution 1325, but from also the whole agenda and the other additional 9 resolutions that altogether form the agenda. The principles remain the same, the principle of participation, prevention and protection of women, particularly from conflict-related sexual violence, but also relief and recovery. But what we do here is to integrate those principles across what we call the core task of NATO. So NATO, as we already said, is based on the principle that of the collective defense. Allies came together in 1949 to avoid that war would come back in Europe and to have this transatlantic bond to support each other. And this is the foundation of the alliance. This is the main and core message. The 3 core tasks speak about this: collective defense, which is deterrence and defense, crisis prevention and management. So we want to avoid having wars because we are a defensive alliance.
Yes.
The principle is not to fight, is to, by deterring, is protecting and avoid the need to defend. But that was crisis management is about the operation outside the area I explained earlier. And cooperative security is to look outside our borders, the NATO one, and work with our partners. Partners can be defined in different ways by being other countries, but also other international organizations such as the UN, the EU, and the OSCE or the African Union. We have agreements with all the other organizations. We try to support each other, to promote and advocate for the same objective. This applies to many areas, including women, peace, and security. So how do we look at this from a NATO perspective is to support the 3 core tasks I just mentioned and make sure that there is a gender analysis in what we do. In everything where it's pertinent and relevant. Of course, this starts with the representation of women in the armed forces. And it's interesting to see that NATO started addressing this topic in the aftermath of the Second World War. So way before this agenda was conceptualized by the UN on one side and by NATO throughout the policy framework that came only in 2007. But the reality was that women have always been part of the armed forces or fighting wars or resisting wars. So it's not that this came throughout the political framework. So women who had been part of the armed forces who fought during the Second World War came together again in creating a network and across the different countries and see how they could overcome the barriers, what were the challenges. And with the time, this group of women transformed in a formal committee on women and the armed forces, later change into Committee on Gender Perspective. So this committee already exists, and the difference that they don't sit here at NATO as other committees. They sit at the capital, they come together once per year, and they try also to support the work of the special representative and the military other, my work now in these days in the CAP to see how to, on one side, support the integration and increase the number of women in support the integration, but also at the same time, bring this different perspective in what we do. And that's how the history came, and then it came throughout and the policy and the establishment of the position. Right now, my priorities are really to support the core of the message of where we are. So it's deterrence and defense. And how do we do this? Certainly throughout fourth generation, which means how do we create more skills and competences in the armed forces by including more women. Now,
but not only, right? But also
only. Yes. But this is also looking at the armed forces in a different way, that it's more contemporary. So moving from this traditional idea of going and fighting on the front lines, but looking to how a conflict or preventing a conflict today means in a multi-domain environment. We all speak and hear every day talking about drones, about also dual use of drones. So do we have enough expertise on that? Do we have enough perspectives and different perspectives on this? So we know that women and girls are less attracted by the science and technology. So we know that also the UN put in place many projects and advocacy to have more women and more girls in science and technology, because it's only throughout this education path, that then the different career opportunities will
of
open
course.
up. So deterring today doesn't mean only joining the armed forces, which is one possibility, but there is also different way of doing. There is the career in the armed forces, but is also the reserve national structures where you join your country, the army for one period, but then you go back to your work, and the civilian work. So it's understanding the different patterns and the different dynamic, but also looking into the civilian preparedness and the society resilience. So for me right now, it's extremely important to have this whole of society approach as an understanding, as a framework. And we are looking at the Nordic countries, Sweden in particular, to see how they implement this. On that, they are more advanced.
So they're a great addition for you, obviously.
Yes, on that perspective. They were great partners before, but then, of course, as an allies, they can really bring this as a model, and we can only learn and then adapt to the different contexts, national contexts.
So the world is seeing more and more attacks and what we call the pushback on gender equality. Does it impact your work? Do you feel that in your work?
The pushback on gender equality is part of history. We all have seen this going very high and then going down. I always say it will come back again. Maybe not in the same way, that there will be a new revived political support. It is clear that we are all impacted by this. I mean, I think with no exception. My daily work continues. In particular, as I was saying, that's one of the objectives. The other is the support to Ukraine. And there has been no difference on that. We all, allies and colleagues here, believe that this is essential. Supporting Ukraine and also learning from Ukraine. We are learning from them when it comes to fighting, when it comes the role of women across the society in all roles, and we need also to support them in the day after and drawing our lessons learned from other conflicts and saying that this agenda has an impact because we learn things. So for me, it would be a big failure to find ourselves internationally not ready to support Ukraine in the day after, not being ready before, not waiting the day of the peace agreement to say, what do we need to do? We forgot about including women, because we don't need to wait for that. We have enough lessons learned and mechanism in place. So from that perspective, this has not changed, but I also have to say that the resistance is still in place. Even if we make progress, we have not reached this, even before this new wave of pushback. The cultural change across I'm talking about global level, was not completed. So the resistance on considering gender equality, women, peace and security as important as other topics was not there yet.
And also because it's a male-dominated environment, right?
It remains. So I think we need a new generation change. So we were going to the right track. As NATO, we adopted a new policy on women, peace and security in 2024, and I strongly advocate, with the support of allies and their full consensus, on having gender-responsive leadership and accountability as the main goal, overarching the others. Because I always say we can prevent, protect, increase participation, but if the leadership is not supportive and make accountable of this, we will not change. You can have as many gender advisors as you want, but as long as they are not put in the right position, high-level positions, and their commander or commander in the military terms, or for political leaders on the others, are not supportive and convinced, that nothing will happen. And it's not only empowering the gender advisor, but is leading by example and being a positive model.
So reflecting back on your career now, was there one moment in particular where you thought that your work really mattered? Was there a moment where you were really
I think that
proud?
It was extremely important. When I joined NATO, it was 4 weeks before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I came with a plan, which was, also taking the time to understand and then looking at the project. And after 4 weeks, there's urgency for the entire alliance to adapt to the new posture and to change immediately and to respond and understanding and being supportive, but also to be ready to deter. Nobody knew what was going to happen also to including to allies. So immediately I had to change the mindset and the way of working and understanding also that the alliance, despite the policies and the action plan and a lot of implementation and many progress is done, was not ready to automatically integrate, for example, gender conflict analysis. So this
Because it was not the priority?
not because it was a mindset.
A mindset, okay.
There's working on the policy on a separate track. This is, if you ask me, still where we were, and we are still there, making progresses, slow progresses, but the mainstreaming concept, it's very difficult to be put in place. It works in some areas, less in others. Still, colleagues talking about, but that's financial, is not a gender, it's not WPS. When I say the gender budgeting, they need to allocate money in a different way. So that's also a complicated concept for many people still.
Who just don't know how.
Yes, don't know. But then
things work.
We sit together and we see the progress, because then many colleagues now came back with their own proposals, across the house. Because basically my work together with my team is to make sure that the alliance integrate this where it's relevant and to overall. And then we can do dedicated projects, of course. But then the role is to make sure that the alliance can move in this direction, which we think is the right way of doing work. So what I realized there, for example, that when we were doing security briefings about the situation in Ukraine, nobody had yet thought to integrate the gender analysis. And so I started for the first time ever to join my colleagues at the table at the council where ambassadors, the North Atlantic Council, where ambassadors from the 32 allies, 30 at that time, sit together with the Secretary General to discuss different topics. This is the way of working here. We were listening to the briefings, sometimes directly from Ukraine, sometimes done by our colleagues in the House, and nobody thought to connect the two parts. We had to wait until the massacre of Bucha to say, yes, but this is the conflict. Everybody knew we have a dedicated policy on conflict-related sexual violence, which was nothing new, but saying, yes, we have to merge this. Mm-hmm. This is what it means in reality, not only in principles. Means what it's happening during the war. This war, I think, was in one way incredible and is still, because we are working with them, observing while the war is ongoing and taking measure to support the reconstruction, to prevent, if we look at the war in the 90s in the Balkans, so now all this dimension of conflict-related sexual violence that came after all the processes, the prosecution, it came after the war, it was over, and the support. Now, it's incredible when we look at what Ukrainians are doing.
It's documenting,
prosecuting. They they revise their own action plan for the implementation of 1325 during the war. This is something that never happened before. So we are, when we say learning from them and see, but also learning about the relevance of this framework, because if you want to make this relevant, you have to adapt it to the context and to the situation. You have to be ready to respond and be flexible on this. Otherwise, it remains a piece of paper, good principles, but separate from life. And that's also a bit the way what happened on that moment 4 years ago, saying, this is war, so we have the policy, we have the commitment, we have also the action that we implemented, but now we need to merge this.
And thank you for that. You mentioned a couple of women throughout this interview and this conversation, but was there one person who really shaped your career, or just an encounter that you had that really stayed with you and had an impact on you?
I think I mentioned already the three. One was the professor, Yakin Erturk, because she really opened my eyes. And when it comes, first from the studies, but also about the person she was. And I remember her telling me at some point, said, we discuss about children, and I told her, I'm waiting for the good moment. And I'm waiting to find this. I want to work on that. After I completed the master, I started work. I say, now I understood that's something I want to do. so I need to find this job. We were about to move to Brussels, and she looked at me and she said, this will never come. It will never be the right moment. At a certain point, she said, if you want, you have to go, because it will be what it will be. And in the end, it was exactly like this. Absolutely not the right moment. It happened when my husband was living in Rome. We were commuting, so I spent my pregnancy here at NATO alone. And it was fine. It was completely different from what I had expected. But again, I think something I had to learn, that you cannot control everything. And sometimes even if it's less, or it's different from what you have expected, it can be equally nice and you can be surprised. The other person was Maris Kare, the special representative. At that time, it was
at
only...
NATO, here.
Yes, here at NATO. The two of us, we didn't know each other. We started working together, and it was an amazing experience, extremely challenging, because we had to create from scratch the office and the way of working. So when I came back after 10 years, I found an office with more advisors, a more structured work, more mainstream. I was on one way also proud, because we started this together, and then this was, the fundamentals and the roots of the work that then the successor did. And the last person I would like to mention, I already mentioned, but I want to say, is Francesca Tardioli. She was, I mentioned...
parliamentarian?
No, she was the person who invited me to do the interview here when then I got the job as an advisor. But the point is that she was my supervisor when I did my first experience at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Our path crossed, in several professional moments, because she helped me get in this interview when here at NATO the first time. But then when we went back to Rome, we worked together at the project of the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network. We found this together. So she was at the ministry, I was the implementing partner with WISE. But we work on this, we launch, and we work together for 4 years. So in one way or the other, she has been mon fil rouge.
The thread, yeah.
Yes, and I want to remember her because she passed away 4 years ago. And I think that without her and having worked together in some key moments, I would not be the person I am today. And I would not have this role here at NATO.
I think it's great to acknowledge that. Thank you so much. So we're going to move to the harder moments, if that's okay. Starting with a little bit of a mix between, personal and political. Was there a moment, a political or geopolitical moment, that really affected you personally in your work, where you had a hard time dealing with it?
Maybe this moment of pushback when you have to acknowledge that you cannot continue always because you are on a positive track. There are moments where maybe you need to have a strategic pause. And there are things that are bigger than us. So we are just a part of the puzzle. So it doesn't mean that it's a failure. Maybe we need to find other ways of working. And I think that goes beyond what I do in my life. I think that the world we knew, you as well, yes. Coming from decades of work at the UN is no longer there. I was in New York 2 weeks ago meeting with many colleagues, UN women, but also across other agencies. Many colleagues losing their job or having to change.
The morale is low.
Yes, the morale is low. And I think that we have to acknowledge that this era is over. It doesn't mean that we will no longer work on certain projects or issues, but maybe we are now collectively pushed to think how to put in place new strategies.
But we need to grieve as well. And I think colleagues are in the process of grief,
I agree.
That era. And does it mean that you felt discouraged at some point?
A little bit in some moments. Yes. I'm a human being.
Of course.
That's part of this conversation.
Yes.
And when you have a leadership position, the other expect you always to have a vision. But in certain moments, you have also to accept that you cannot have a vision alone. I can still have my vision, but I have to cope with the reality around me. And we all have. So sometimes there is frustration, because there would be, willingness to do more, to do this differently, and we have to find this compromise. It's always a question of compromise, and that's what I learned here at NATO. What we have to do is compromising between 32 positions, and we will find a middle ground. We will have this famous consensus, so agreed documents or agreed decisions, And sometimes you are frustrated because as an expert you would have loved to see more on that, but managing this consensus and finding this consensus while respecting diversity, as we said, is where we have to get the strength. But there are up and downs. There were before in life and also my professional life, but I think we, in this moment, we live this, as I said, it's not a personal, but it's a collective crisis. And we have to be gentle with ourselves while we keep working, but also grieving to find other ways, because I think I strongly believe in what I'm doing. And I think what we do, because I don't do this alone, is essential for building a better world. And in the moment when I became a mother and a mother of 2 girls, I realized that there won't be any moment in my life when I will be able to give up, because what I'm doing is a way to make a better world for them.
For your daughters?
Yes, mine and all the daughters, girls in the world.
So that's actually a good transition. How would you describe the state of multilateralism today?
Of course, it's in a different era. We saw this. We saw that certainly, can we say that it's in a crisis? There are moments of crisis. But as I said, the point is coping with diversity. And this is not new. Maybe there are moments where this diversity is more present.
More polarized,
and
maybe?
more polarized than before. But it's a wave. And we as a multilateral organization survived decades and different wars, because of course we said after the Second World War, but we had again wars in many countries close to Europe. We had the Balkans, we had now Ukraine, but we have wars at the border of NATO in Libya. We have another war going on right now. There are crises, but there are solutions as well. And the unity that's represented by allies, I believe on it, and I believe on the capacity to find agreement and remain united and to find the most suitable solutions.
Thank you so much, Irene. Maybe one last question, the final question. Can you tell us a little bit more about your future project? I just want to take a moment to look forward and maybe tell us a little bit about one thing that excites you for the near future on a personal level and another one more on a professional level.
I'm not there yet. I still have more or less 2 years to go here at NATO. So I'm a very dedicated person, so committed in maintaining the focus in what I'm doing, which is already challenging because I said as the world is changing, we have to adapt.
So is the mandate capped?
Yes, the mandate was 3 years. I got an extension of another 3 years. So now I still have 2 years to go. And this will be the end because at a high-level position, so it's based on rotation. So you can be extended once, but then for the principle of rotation, also geographical, and someone else will come after me. My profession is to make sure that we can adapt to the world that is changing. Also maybe in a new way of the multilateralism. So when it comes to the agenda, make sure that who will come after me, and also, people rotate here all the time to make sure that it's solid enough not to face too big challenges when people will change, and so that it's really part of the work, more mainstream and more institutionalized, which is the big challenge. What I learned in my experience is that maybe working more on the mainstreaming would help. So working on the brand is good, but sometimes the brand is also the 1325 of the gender has a pushback effect with the others. So if there is something I would like to do is to go more into the international career, less branded, if I can say so.
With no flag.
Yes, no flag, and being able to do more. Mm-hmm. In a different role and different capacity, because I think that one of the biases there is around this, if people think that you work on gender equality or you work on women, peace and security, you have opinions on that topic only, without fully understanding that this is the foundation of democracy, of social dynamics, economic dynamics. So we could unpack this and spend hours talking about how relevant this, and this is a lens to look about, throughout our societies, our political decision, and how this will have an impact on men and women, and consequently on the overall security. So I think that also broaden a bit my perspective is something I would like, and possibilities professionally is something I would like to look at. Something that comes regularly in my life, a bit less now because I have less time, but more because of the visibility, is the mentoring part.
Okay.
Many young professional women, they look for me, they look for advice. So I try to do mentoring when I can throughout WISE Italy. I will launch a mentoring program here at NATO this year. It's part of the project of the year.
So who is it for?
Is for young professional women across, we will start with a pilot project across allied countries, and we will see to create as a space to learn about the defense sector and security. So because, as you said, people don't know exactly what NATO does, but not only about NATO, it's really about our own countries, how we are going throughout a transformation when it comes to the defense and security, this tension between also the agenda, the non-militarized approach to security, and what we are seeing in our society, why this is needed, but at the same time also how we can play a role also through our civilian preparedness together, bringing military and civilian in a conversation, private and public sector as well. So we can have maybe see in 1 year time what the pilot project will give in terms of this. So certainly mentoring and will remain part of what I do. And I think that WISE Italy will be remain after I will step down from NATO, the place where I will go back to continue, my home. And then I'm open to different opportunities, and also again maybe life will surprise me with some unknown projects,
as it always has.
Indeed.
Thank you so much, Irene, for sharing all of these insights with us. It's been really fascinating to hear about your story, your career, and all of the choice that you made or that came to you throughout your career. And thank you so much again for having me in this beautiful studio in beautiful NATO headquarters. Thank you.
Thank you to you for this opportunity. It was a great conversation, and then more to follow.
Thank you.